Reach 37 degrees. I'm meteorologist Jason Caterina on AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. This was the scene outside of the Whipple Federal Building near what was formerly Minneapolis, now known more colloquially as Mogadishu, Minnesota, at least by me. A texter offered Somaliopolis. Yeah, okay. This is the scene outside that federal building. We're familiar with these antics. Same thing happened outside the ICE facility in Broadview during Operation Midway Blitz, the height of it, right? Fine, you can have your little chance, no problem. That's protesting. Okay. This starts to get up against the line. Those protesters setting up effectively a de facto checkpoint outside the facility to check for quote-unquote Nazis. Car drives up, and this is how that went.
That's what a Nazi would say.
Not a Nazi!
I mean, it's still, all fun and games, but starting to give you an insight into the mentality, isn't it? It has a bit of an Antifa in Portland feel where Portland police deferred to Antifa to police the streets how they saw fit. And again, this is all against the backdrop of the possibility of President Trump invoking the Insurrection Act if we can't get law and order on the streets of Mogadishu, Minnesota. Members of the community at the Mogadishu City Council meeting suggesting that city council members take specific steps to impede ICE operations, like this brilliant idea.
We are on our own. So what are you going to do about it? I acknowledge the difficulty of a city standing up to the federal government, but that should only inspire our creativity. I would recommend that our snowplows should dump snow to block the roads to the Whipple building and any staging areas to prevent these thugs from launching violent raids on our city. Also, our traffic laws apply to everyone. Minneapolis officers should be ordered to keep our streets safe by ticketing anyone going 31 and a 30, using a cell phone while driving, or not wearing a seatbelt. Make it personally expensive.
Sure. So put up impediments to federal law enforcement officers from getting into a federal facility, and use local law enforcement to, harass through traffic citations federal law enforcement. Seems like something Jacob Fry, Pajamas Boy, the mayor there, might be inclined to support based on what he said yesterday, with his police chief, Brian O'Hara, standing right next to him.
And we're in a position right now where we have residents that are asking the very limited number of police officers that we have to fight ICE agents on the street, to stand by their neighbors. We cannot be at a place right now in America where we have two governmental entities that are literally fighting one another.
Well, I'm sorry, what are you suggesting? So if those alleged residents who are asking local police to fight ICE, what's your message to them, Mr. Mayor? For more on this, pleased to be joined by Liz Collin, multi-Emmy award-winning reporter and anchor, the producer as well of the Fall of Minneapolis documentary. Liz, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So between Tim Walz's video taped message to the people of Minnesota, which he said that ICE agents were going door to door asking Minnesotans to point to black and brown people in their neighborhood, to Jacob Fry suggesting that the local police are fighting with federal law enforcement. What is the state of play there? And I know your husband is a retired police. What are Minneapolis police saying, doing in this moment?
Well, I would say that they're very frustrated with everything that's been allowed to happen again. But, they've been given stand-down orders. They're not allowed to cooperate with ICE. That has been the case for quite some time. I don't see that changing unless politics, drastically change in Minneapolis. That's not going to happen overnight, no doubt about that. But morale is at an all-time low. Those are words from the union president herself, who sent out a memo to cops. In fact, we have a new family leave program, a new law in Minnesota, and we're aware now that more than 100 cops in Minneapolis have now applied. This is 20 weeks of paid leave, essentially. They kind of call it a new fraud program, but Minneapolis cops are like, hey, we're not appreciated and we can't do anything. We're going to go ahead and take this. We also know that 150 Minneapolis police officers are eligible to retire this year as well. So really a sad state of affairs in Minneapolis. We're hearing about a big protest planned for tomorrow. These activist groups are well-funded. They're well-organized around the Minneapolis area, but they really do not speak to the vast majority of Minnesotans. Clearly do not support this ridiculous behavior.
And it was federal police that had to come in and arrest the guy who turned out to be a Latin King gangbanger, apparently, that stole a high-powered rifle from an FBI vehicle that they vandalized and ransacked. That was a federal law enforcement had come in. When I saw at the Capitol building, there was a student walkout, quote-unquote, protest that immediately turned violent and people fighting, and that had to be broken up. I mean, so what you're saying is Minneapolis police are sort of abdicating because they've been told to stand down, and yet you have Fry and Walz essentially saber-rattling on behalf of the police force in the direction of law enforcement. Is Trump right to be threatening the invocation of the Insurrection Act to restore order? Because it doesn't seem like Minneapolis police are going to be empowered to do that. It seems more likely that they're giving a wink and a nod. I mean, the politicians are giving a wink and a nod to people to behave as we've seen them behave, which is violently and illegally, because the police aren't going to do anything about it. And I mean, Jacob Fry was on the precipice of encouraging police to go into combat against ICE officers.
Yeah, just going to walk your listeners through the sequence of events this week. It's very interesting. So you had Nick Shirley release another video on fraud this week on Wednesday, and it was within hours, all of a sudden we hear from Governor Walz for the first time in several days. He's been keeping a very low profile. And in this speech, he talks about, recording ICE officers for future prosecutions. We'd like to create a database, help us do that. I think more than anything, this is a PR move. They're trying to get the spotlight off of this massive fraud scandal in Minnesota. So then you have the governor make those remarks. Then you have President Trump threaten the Insurrection Act, followed then by a statement from Governor Walz, who seems to sort of back off and say, hey, everybody keep calm. So I think there's a lot of deflection going on in Minnesota to avoid this fraud topic at all costs.
Well, but Jacob Fry didn't give a calm down message. That wasn't a calm down message.
Well, I think that we have a little bit more going on with the state leaders with the implications. I'm not saying Mayor Fry is innocent in this at all, but this is kind of expected from the mayor at this point. I mean, anybody who's paid attention to Minneapolis politics knows how nuts this guy is. So.
Yeah, but okay, and so on the fraud matter that they want to deflect attention away from, and use Trump and ICE as the boogeyman, we get the MO here. So where is that at? I mean, it seems to me it's completely within the realm of federal law enforcement again, because I don't see any particular interest from Keith Ellison or Mary Moriarty or anybody at the state or local level in the region, in the state.
Yeah, that's why I think they seem to be thankful that there is this ongoing chaos, that they can continue to, sort of do this pitting against, different agencies and, normal people against these activists who have now come in again, but or just lying about all of these incidents. This is what they do. But the fraud, it's interesting. I spent some time with Dr. Oz today, the administrator, or this week, I should say, the administrator of Medicare and Medicaid, and also Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill. They were in town from HHS. They were out checking out fraud sites. They were quickly surrounded in a parking lot, flipped off, told to leave. It's just really some chaotic scenes that played out for them as they're trying to gather answers. But they said they're here because President Trump is done with this. They're going to go ahead and get to the bottom of it, and more than anything, get it to end. But this is something that's really been going on for a decade. I've been a reporter in Minnesota for 20 years, and this has been a part of the news cycle in one way, shape, or form for quite a while. But with all these new eyes on all of it, with these viral videos from Nick Shirley, I think the writing is on the wall that the fraudsters' days are numbered in Minnesota.
Well, I mean, and what are the potential implications of cutting off federal funding to Minnesota? I mean, at first it was just Medicaid payments, and now it's February 1, cutting off funding to sanctuary states, generally speaking, from various federal agencies, the revenue streams from various federal agencies. I read that basically a third of Minnesota's state budget is federal dollars.
Yeah, there are some real concerns. There are actually legit businesses in Minnesota who rely on this funding. Yeah. And we've been documenting their concerns as well. But and we have a lot of reporting over at alphanews.org. In fact, we launched a fraud page on our website. This was months and months ago now. Just about all the stories we've done. I think it's more than 300 or 400 at this point over the last 10 years. So you can really just get a better idea of how deep this all goes. But that's actually what Dr. Oz was speaking about, how it's like this criminal network that's been set up here. And he did say that, we're not here to be taking out legit businesses. We are aware of a couple, like a group home that's closing in northern Minnesota due to funding issues. There's just a lot of things that still have to be sorted out.
Well, that's part of the story. When you allow fraud to run rampant in the system, then people who are on the up and up get hurt too. I mean, this is people who are really in need of the services get hurt too. I mean, that's part of the message, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's been said here from these legit business owners how they've been impacted, but in many ways, just speaking to members of the federal government, they just can't believe that so many on both sides, have allowed this sort of look the other way. And in doing our reporting that we've done, you see in so many of these cases that this is so deep. It's tied to legislation that's passed at the Capitol for federal reimbursement for things, rides to school. All of a sudden, homeless populations are rising at school districts across the state. Not because there are more homeless kids, but because these vans can go ahead, these van drivers can get reimbursed 100% from the federal government for these rides. Are they taking any kids? Doesn't seem like it. Are there any safeguards in place? Doesn't seem like it. So they've really exploited every program they possibly can.
And the willful blindness even of federal authorities in the previous administration.
Right.
I mean, you did one of the first interviews I saw of a TSA whistleblower who talked about, for half a dozen years, she watched essentially tens of millions of dollars in cash be couriered by Somali men through the airport there and out to Abu Dhabi and perhaps over to Somalia and who knows, God knows wherever else. And there was a lot of shoulder shrugging, a lot of curiosity among TSA agents, but it never rose to the level of anybody doing anything about it.
Yeah, and actually I've even talked to some former people on the task force investigating all of this, and they've told me how they were turning this over to the U.S. attorney at the time for charges, and everything just would kind of disappear. But these were these were people that were picked either under Biden or President Obama even at the time. So nothing went anywhere. They just disappeared. Those were their words, how they described it.
Well, part of this is something you said at the outset in terms of what we're seeing dominate social media and certainly D.C. press corps or local press corps reporting it to some extent too, is maybe not representative of regional opinion on the matter of federal immigration law enforcement and the importance of the revelations of these fraudsters. I wondered about the political implications. Obviously, one of them has already been meted out in terms of the belief that Tim Walz wasn't viable to run again, and so he's not. But in Minnesota is sort of a curious state. On the one hand, the legislature is very hotly contested, is very close. On the other hand, at the statewide level, it's dominated by people like Tim Walz and Keith Ellison. So one wonders if you think that there is the possibility of a political reckoning, from the electorate coming, if not in Minneapolis, then maybe at the state level.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of this. We have a very crowded field for governor on the Republican side of things, and everybody thinks that it's going to be Senator Amy Klobuchar that's going to run for governor now in Minnesota. She's definitely keeping her distance from Governor Walz, no doubt about that, but has yet to make anything official. But I do, I actually did an event down in southern Minnesota this week, and you do sort of feel this sense of hope for a change, I think, in Minnesota, that maybe, change is coming. But, you have a lot of people still calling for Governor Walz to resign. And I do think that, he's definitely not out of the woods yet, as much as he's desperately trying to get the news cycle to change off this fraud thing. But yeah, I think there's some really good candidates running for governor. And this isn't it's always like Minnesota is made into this blue state. That is not the case at all. It's a couple blue cities. And like in the other state, but the vast majority of Minnesotans, the polling shows they support ICE. This is what President Trump ran on, and people don't want to live next to murderers or child rapists. This isn't something that's really that controversial when it comes to Minnesotans with common sense.
Right, and we talked about this too, but I mean, just your perspective on it. It seems like it's a pretty straightforward response to politicians that are being so wildly disingenuous. You say you don't want, you say we're a sanctuary city, but of course we want public safety threats, people who have been convicted of crimes and are in this country illegal. Of course we want them removed. Okay, but you want to you force ICE to abdicate. So who would remove them? It's just like a simple practical question that I presume practical people that are not necessarily ideological in even in the metropolitan area can understand.
Yeah, I think that these scenes aren't playing out in other states, and why is that? That's because local police departments, local sheriff's departments are allowed to cooperate with ICE. That's not allowed here. Attorney General Keith Ellison issued this ruling, I guess, if you will, this interpretation of the Minnesota Constitution, saying that you can't cooperate with ICE. And we've seen sort of bit by bit sheriff's departments break off, and they're entering into that 287G program that allows them to cooperate with ICE, meaning that these illegal aliens, if they're picked up, if they're in jails, they're picked up from jail. They're not allowed to go home, and then you have these ICE agents who are forced out, into these neighborhoods to go to these businesses to track these guys down, to pick them up. This is not happening in other states, but in a way, you have these Democratic politicians trying to capitalize on that chaos.
I mean, just since you did such a deep dive on the George Floyd case in your documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis, can you compare and contrast for us on the outside the local feelings and reaction, including to the fallout of George Floyd's death and Renee Good's?
Yeah, I will say that there's certainly some similarities with the outside. There's been a lot of outside agitators that have come in, and I think that's kind of been ramping up day by day. But you also have this fight for the narrative that I think was not allowed to happen in this case. We actually were able to obtain the cell phone video of the officer involved within just a couple days of the incident, which shows Renee Good revving her engine. You have her wife saying, drive, baby, drive. You have the officer who's clearly hit on that cell phone video because you can hear it. In George Floyd, remember, they hid all of the evidence. They hid the body cameras. Nobody could see that for 2.5 months. Many people to this day have never seen it unless you've seen the fall of Minneapolis. But there was just so much more to that story. So you originally had, Mayor Fry, within hours of Renee Good, this incident, he's telling ICE to, get the F out of the city and yada, yada. They're spinning this into a murder, but their language quickly was tamped down after the full story was coming out. You also have DHS. They released a video that shows Renee Good and her wife, along with many cars, being on scene for several minutes, honking horns, trying to obstruct ICE and their activities. This isn't just a mom who happens to drop her kid off, which the local media and the Democrats were trying to portray. She's dropping her kid off, going home after school drop-off, and she just happens to run into an ICE officer who executes her in the middle of the street. That narrative quickly was stopped once that video came out.
Yeah, Adam Schiff. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah, and also the information that came out, the report that came out that Officer Ross suffered internal bleeding. So, I mean, that doesn't happen just by standing around. So anyway, Liz Collin, multi-Emmy award-winning reporter and anchor, producer of The Fall of Minneapolis. Liz, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Have a good weekend, sir.
You too. And coming up, we'll have Open Mic Friday. Take your calls, 312-642-5600. Text us as well if you like. Now we check the headlines.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's